Hello, everybody. Welcome to MHTV. We're really pleased to have you with us today. We're talking a very interesting and very timely topic. We're talking about the Art Cares project, and we're thinking about how creative activities can really be supportive for people experiencing mental distress. Before we get stuck in, though, let me hand you over to Dave to tell you how you can join in and ask questions if you want to. Dave?
Oh, thanks, Nicky. Yeah, hello, everyone. And I want to wish everyone a happy 75th NHS birthday out there.
Oh, yeah.
Big important day. Yep. Woo. Yes, so if you want to get involved in the conversation tonight, two really easy ways. The first one on Facebook Live. All you have to do is head over to the right side of the screen and just type in any of your comments or questions, and we'll feed in any of those that we can tonight. The other option you've got is over on Twitter, and all you need to do is make sure that the hashtag MHTV is included in any of your tweets, and I'll be keeping an eye out for that tonight, and again, bringing in any comments or questions from over on Twitter. But without further ado, straight back to you, Nicky.
Absolutely. So let's come to our guest then. Tamsin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good evening. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you. Well, I come from a background of art teaching, taught art in the state secondary school for 25 years, and then was becoming more and more disillusioned with the downgrading of art as a curriculum subject, and something that I was always thought was very important was taking pupils to see museums, galleries and heritage sites, to take them to see the real thing. And this became increasingly difficult because of, you can guess, finance, but also curriculum pressures, the art not being considered important, and the pupil premium being spent on the so-called more important aspects of schooling, and also the way that some pupils were excluded because of behaviour. And it seemed to me ultimately that I was ending up taking a small group of pupils who possibly were already accessing art and culture through things they did with their families. So that was sort of towards the end of my teaching career, and then I made a move into doing an MA in museum and heritage development, which was absolutely brilliant, and then coincided with my own sort of personal storm of pandemic plus breast cancer diagnosis. So I was kind of doing those two things alongside, which actually worked really well for me, bizarrely perhaps, but it gave me the time to focus on the academic work, without also having to be teaching, which is what my original plan was. So then I did a dissertation looking at sort of just that, really, taking secondary pupils to a heritage site, but beginning by comparing what the on-screen experience was compared to actually seeing the real thing and smelling, touching, being there, which, you know, post-pandemic was obviously relevant. And that sort of made me come into contact with the social justice area of work in the museum space, which led me to the job at Mansfield Museum, where I'm community projects assistant on the Art Power project. And at the same time, in my first year of a PhD study, which is exploring the potential benefits to well-being of creative activities for vulnerable women in the museum space. So that's making me quite busy at the moment.
I imagine it is. And I think you've got so many things I already want to talk about, but I'm like, one at a time, Nicky, one at a time. And I guess one thing is this idea about sort of museums being sort of separate spaces sometimes, considering museums belong to everybody. And particularly I was thinking about the free museums you've got in London. They are only visited by certain types of people, despite the fact that everyone's paying for them. And that's really interesting. And then the second part was you talking about sort of using kind of art and creativity and that kind of heritage side of things to actually support vulnerable people. So
Yeah.
often, you know, that can happen for older adults and for younger people, but less so for sort of working age women. If you could tell us a little bit about your project and what makes it, because it is very distinct, isn't it? It's quite an unusual project.
Yes, and it came out of the pandemic, really.
Mm.
And so Mansfield is a small town, half an hour north of Nottingham, about 110,000 people,
Mm.
with a very industrial past of mining,
Yeah.
textiles, and the council noticed that the figures for women accessing domestic abuse services increased significantly. There's a lot of deprivation in Mansfield, and so this project was launched to try and make a difference to that population, particularly.
Mm.
So my role was first of all to build relationships and make contact with services such as the NIDAS, which is the Nottinghamshire Independent Domestic Abuse Service,
Mm.
NSVSS, the Sexual Violence Support Services, Women's Aid, and so on.
Mm.
And I started to receive referrals. So the idea of Art Power was to use the museum's collection to engender creative activities which would allow the women to access their art and culture, which is after all a human
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
and to develop a sense of identity and place, which you know, had often been eroded through the traumatic backgrounds that
Mm.
they've come from.
Mm.
So we began by setting up five different groups. I thought it was important to keep the groups relatively small so that the women would feel special and surrounded with care and empathy. One thing that I tried to do when I first sort of explored the museum store was to sort of tease out some of the women's stories.
Mm.
Mansfield could be described as a sort of white working class kind of place, and you know, a lot of the industries are heavy industries. So the women's stories are there, but they're not sort of front and center.
Mm.
We found a couple of women mayors that have been there over time. There's a beautiful full-length oil painting of the cotton mill's widow. There's a Peter Blake screen print of a female wrestler. So we've starting to tease out the women's stories and look at the different sort of creative activities that we could use to explore. So we work with clay, with weaving, with machine stitch, with felt making, with collage, but really with the aim of the projects being driven by the women's interests, and getting them in the store exploring, and taking ownership of their creative journey, as it were.
It's making me think of lots of things again. I guess particularly if you've experienced domestic abuse or assault, it can be something that really does take away your voice, take away your identity. And I love the idea that actually the world around you can nurture those connections back again. How's that been working in that way?
Well, what you mentioned earlier about the museum space, I think it is a really unique space. And at first I thought, why are we doing this in the museum? This is social care. So the state should be taking care of this. But actually, the museum is actually in some ways a really, really good space, mostly because of, I mean, obviously it has the collection and so on, but a lot of the reasons are around what it isn't. So it isn't a clinical setting. It isn't an administrative, sort of hierarchical, hegemonic setting. and also it's not home,
Mm.
which for some women is not actually a safe space.
Mm.
You know, even if the perpetrator is no longer around,
Mm.
you know, there are often memories, and you know, people have issues with things
Mm.
like stalking and so on, where
Mm.
the home really is not as the safe haven that it
Mm.
should be.
Mm.
And the museum is also it has the resources. It is that sort of cultural asset,
Mm.
which means that there's always something going on. There's always something to see. I mean, just to give you an example of a project we've been working on this week, something completely driven by the women.
Mm.
When I was collecting, so one of the big issues is getting women to come, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
the museum may be a space that they haven't visited before,
Yeah.
or they came as a child on a school trip and they've never come back.
Mm.
But Mansfield Museum is a small town museum, and it's right in the centre, and it is very much a community centre with a collection, as the curator describes it.
Mm.
What was I trying to say? But yes, so getting the women to come, encouraging them to come. So I would have a contact for them through the service that had referred them,
Mm.
Women's Aid or whoever it was, and I would talk to the woman on the phone about the day and time that might suit her to come and so on. But then actually taking that step through the door to come into a space that you don't know, to meet people that you don't know, to do something that you're not sure you're going to enjoy or what it's going to involve,
Mm.
you know, is actually massive. So
Yeah, huge.
I have a lot of names on a list, and a smaller group who attend.
Mm.
But what is happening is that those that have attended once are returning. And we've got some women who have been in the project for 18 months now. But we try and do things to sort of mitigate that getting through the door bit.
Mm.
The museum is closed on a Monday to the public, so that makes it a really good day for people to come when they might be concerned about who else is going to be there. So we do that. We provide childcare. We provide all the art materials are completely free. So all they have to do, and for a lot of them this is a big challenge, is to bring themselves. But you're dealing with people who are socially anxious, who are in a hyper alert state, who have got PTSD, and all these things make it a real challenge. And it's just been really wonderful to see sort of burgeoning confidence and the peer-to-peer support that the women give each other. And the sort of best times are really when I can kind of disappear, because my role is no longer needed, because they're doing it for themselves. And I think the fact that they're coming to the museum with a purpose, which is ostensibly or overtly the creative work, it's an art workshop connecting with the museum objects, so there's a reason to be in that space. But actually then they start talking, and and those social connections start to come, and confidence builds, and they now some of the women are seeing each other socially outside of the group. We had a trip to the theatre last week. So it's developing.
It is. I think when people get chunks taken out of them, you don't realise how long it can take for them to sort of regenerate kind of a feeling of wholeness again, in whatever form that takes. And
and trust, I think.
Yeah.
The building trust is just massive, isn't it? When you've had that taken away from you.
I like the idea as well about it being a kind of social space that belongs to nobody and everybody. So everybody's on the same footing. There's going to be some people are familiar with it and some people not so much. I like that idea. And also the idea that this belongs to them.
Yes, exactly. It's their stuff. So when you take, I mean, you know, as in any museum, whether, you know, big or small, most of the stuff is in the store. And so to go into the store is always, you know, it's just a massive
Interesting, isn't it?
Aladdin's cave treasure
Yeah.
trove.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get people out once they're in there. But that's really nice, and especially, you know, a lot of the women are sort of born and bred in the area, and you know, they know the names, they know the industries, they find connections.
Yeah, and with their own families as well. You know,
Yes,
their families will have
exactly.
had this presence, even if they didn't access it, the presence will have been in their lives and in their consciousness. And that idea of
Yes,
a sense of place is so important. It's
yes,
eroded constantly, and I think perhaps being all in our houses for a couple of years sort of dug into that a little bit as well. That
yes, I'm
reclaiming
sure that's true.
Tell me a little bit, because the other thing I think is very interesting about this is this idea about sort of creatively responding to artwork or to objects as well, art and
Yeah,
moving objects. I think that's really interesting, the idea that linking sort of head and hands back together, because one of the things I think that can happen for people who've been particularly physically and emotionally abused is a disconnect.
yes,
You become very depersonalized at times, and an idea of actually helping you integrate again as a whole, I think, is really interesting. Tell me a little bit about the creative process.
yes. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. The mind and body connection, and it's something that I've, you know, noticed through my teaching career, that pupils would be just in the zone doing their painting, whatever it is, and the, you know, the bell would go, and they don't want to stop because they're, you know, they're in that moment. And I think um, the the uh, the psychologist, the positive psychologist, somebody called Csikszentmihalyi, developed the idea of flow, which is this idea of being in the zone, and the mind and body working together. And it really does apply to the sort of creative process where um, your hands are working. So for example, you know, with clay, you push your finger into a piece of clay and you get this immediate feedback, so it bulges out, you've made a hole. You push something else out the way, and your mind is engaged in hundreds, thousands of micro creative decisions. You know, do I push that a bit further, do I pull that back, do I smooth that over? And it's all, you know, it's all subconscious, but it's utterly engrossing and engaging. And you're, yeah, these micro decisions. And I it's been interesting experimenting with the different kind of art activities that seem to particularly lend themselves to that kind of feeling. So things that are a bit repetitive. So I mean, it applies to any art activity really, but things like felt making, where you're, you know, you're using your hands and you're rubbing the clay. We're working on stitch at the moment, weaving. So kind of, you know, it's something which is challenging but achievable. So it's not just you know, nothing. You need to focus, and you have this vision in your mind of what you're trying to achieve. And you know, the hands generally sort of lag behind that, but that's, you know, that's your goal. And that well, just what's come to my mind is thinking about the clay again. And we were working on clay, and we were making some tiles which responded to some of the, we've got a lusterware collection at Mansfield, and there's some quite a few that have sort of bird images which are quite stylized and rather lovely, and we were working with those, and some of the tiles cracked in the kiln, and it's one of those sort of the phenomenon of the happy accident, which, you know, well known to any creative practitioner. So, you know, at first it's, oh, you know, disaster, they're broken, but it led to us again, looking in the store and finding a Chinese cup which was mended with staples, which was how it used to be done, which was incredible in itself, because it's sort of finely drilled in the metal, so to reattach these bits of ceramic. But that in Japan, there's a sort of repair technique called kintsugi, which you'll have seen, where it's repaired with gold, so the cracks are visible. So with this the project we were doing, the women absolutely sort of ran with this idea that that we could repair visibly. So they decided that they would make ceramic tiles to break, so on purpose to break, which we then did, and they sort of staged the breaking as a kind of art happening, and they each had something that they wanted to say as they did the breaking, which was which was quite cathartic, I think, in some cases. And they then glazed, refired, and then put together, recreated rather than rejected their ceramic pieces with the gold, and it was just a rather a metaphor for repairing lives, and living with your wrinkles, living with your scars, and not hiding them. But this is part of who I am, and I've done the work of putting myself back together, and I'm taking my next steps. It's very, very empowering, and a lot of them spoke very eloquently about how that made them feel. So I think going with following their lead is something that I've really enjoyed, but also had to learn as a sort of ex-teacher who was used to, we've got an hour and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and you've got 5 minutes to do that, and it's not that at all. It's just much more giving the space for things to happen.
I think we should talk about co-production for sure. I guess one of the things that sort of jumped out from what you were saying as well was this having the luxury of focus for these women as well. If you spent a long time being really hyper vigilant, keeping your eyes open all the time, the idea that you can be safe just to look down at what you're doing and be lost in it is something that is a luxury we don't realize we have until it's lost, I think.
Yes.
I think that's a really amazing gift to be able to give back and share as a group.
Yes, I'm sure that's true. I mean, one thing that the women say is the being in a group, and there's sorry, I wrote I was thinking about post-traumatic group theory, which is Tedeschi and Kalun in 1996, but and it absolutely borne out by some of the women's experiences, that being with other people who have some shared experience kind of kickstarts a new social group and friendships, and I found this for myself, being part of a Maggie's group after sort of post cancer treatment, and part of that is sort of not having to explain to anybody, but being with people who just get it, so you kind of leapfrog some of the stages towards intimacy and friendship, because it's a shared experience, and it's a given. And sometimes they'll talk about elements of that, but mostly not. Just sharing and being together as a sort of in group, I think is really healthy.
I think it's really useful for people to hear about this sort of work as well, because I think people can get pulled into that biomedical model and just stuck there, and I think even the sort of like talking therapies that we've got in mental health at the moment are being so quantified, like CBT, 10 sessions and your money back, and it's just, oh no. Like that does help for some things. There are some things which are almost mechanical, and that you can, through a series of systems and processes, change. But there's also something very important, I think, about being human and understanding that actually humans can help humans.
Yes, absolutely. I was speaking to one of our participants today, and about exactly this, sort of counselling, and 6 weeks of counselling, which just isn't enough. And she was explaining to me that she sees it as this sort of Pandora's box, and if she opens it, it's going to need more than 6 weeks to deal with it and get it back into some kind of package that she can live with. So to open that up in 6 weeks and then be told that's your lot, off you trot, is not going to work. And I thought, that's fantastic sort of level of self-knowledge and insight to know, actually, you may have offered me that, but that's not going to do it for me. So trying to explore something longer term, but it's so difficult, isn't it? I mean, the NSVSS, they've got a 2.5 year waiting list for counselling. So if
leading us very nicely onto our next stage, there is a lot of things to talk about. So we've established sort of like some of the real benefits of that kind of creative activities for people with that experience of distress. I guess maybe it's time to think about the impact on you and colleagues as well, in terms of the emotional load on staff being involved, because obviously you're coming from so many different disciplinary backgrounds, and not all of them necessarily are therapeutic, have therapeutic expectations with them. So tell us a little bit about what that's been like.
Yes, I mean, we do have an art therapist on the project who comes, every now and then to sessions, and we have discussions, which I find really helpful. But that's, well, it's around the sort of creative process, and for example, the grounding effect of working with clay and so on. So that's really helpful. But it is quite mentally challenging. Your sort of human response when you see need in front of you is to help and to fix it. And of course, sometimes you can go some way, but often it's just too big, and it's beyond the remit. And I have to remind myself, I can do this thing. I can I can offer creative activities and a safe space and friendship, but I can't fix everything. And we've had disclosures of sexual abuse. We've had examples of coercive control, with women who are in refuge, and things that are difficult to process, and you're with people who are in distress in some cases. So I find it really useful to just have a bit of a debrief and a not try and do something too major immediately afterwards, but need to sort of decompress. Really, it doesn't always happen, but it's better when it does. I mean, I'm really lucky because the museum in Mansfield is a truly fantastic team, and I'm very, very much supported by the cultural services manager and the curator and all the staff. But I also do have access to supervision through Mansfield District Council, which I do make use of. I mean, that's helpful. In one sense, it's a chance to talk through the safeguarding issues that we've dealt with, and to make sure that we're kind of doing the right thing, and being as helpful as we can, but also just to debrief and to share a little bit with someone else who is working with domestic abuse survivors, and understands that that world, really.
I think it's really important to note that as well, because I think whether you're running a coffee morning or gardening group or football group, whatever, sometimes that can be someone's only lifeline, and you may have set it up to be operating at perhaps a lower level of therapeutic intensity. But if you're the only person that person sees, or the only person, or you create almost like it as a victim of your own success because of the closeness and trust that's in that space, you are likely to hear things which maybe you weren't prepared for. And I think you're so right about the need for emotional support of all kinds, from sort of clinical supervision to just someone to have a cup of tea with.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I think that possibly museums might not always be entirely aware of, the sort of can of worms that they could be opening, which could be potentially emotionally dangerous to. We at the conference that I was part of organising last week at Nottingham Trent University, we had two academics, Jenny Morgan from Stirling and Anna Wooden from King's London, who were talking about emotional toll of this kind of work in museums, and they're about to start some research, in fact, looking into this area. One thing I've felt as an ex-teacher is that the museum education side of things has been professionalized for a long time, but this area of work much less so. Sort of community engagement, it's sometimes called. We had, in fact, Esther Amos Hughes from Leeds Museum last week, who dislikes the term engagement, and I'm with her on that, and sort of suggested that friendship actually was closer. I mean, there are some boundaries involved, but it's really closer to friendship that you're offering. So I think there's some work that needs to be done around this sort of professionalization, and maybe also pay, to make sure that the skills that are required are in place. Because I don't think I could have done this without my sort of pedagogic background and sort of background of working with young people in empathetic ways.
Yeah, I'm sure. I guess the other thing I was thinking about in terms of sort of stress and pressures would be things around funding as well.
Yes, because these things are time limited. I mean, we were lucky enough to get 2 years of funding from the Esmée Fairburn Foundation for this project. But of course, which seems a long time, because sometimes you can have museum projects that last 6 weeks, 10 weeks. But we're already 3/4 of the way through, and some of the women are sort of starting to say, well, what's going to happen? And the idea of sort of pulling the rug when we get to the end of the 2 years is well, it can't happen. So we have a wonderful cultural services manager, Sian Booth at Mansfield, who has already applied for funding to extend through, I think, the Paul Hamlin Foundation also provide this kind of funding. And we have recently become an NPO, a national portfolio organisation, which possibly will. Well, it means funding from the Arts Council for 3 years to back projects in the museum and in the community. So that may give us some leeway, but council-wide things are very, very tight. So so we'll see. But I very much hope that in some way we will be able to continue. And we've also been sort of thinking as we've gone along about sort of longer term engagement in terms of potentially volunteering at the museum, at possibly paid roles at the museum, different ways that the participants might continue or sort of develop their engagement and connection with the museum.
So we'll check and see if Dave wants to come in at all.
Well, I've not seen any questions come up yet. I think I was going to ask that similar question about funding, really, Nicky. And I suppose that bit about environment out there, we know kind of the impact that austerity's had. And kind of, is there a hope that that's going to change anytime soon? I suppose, just thinking about my own local authority and the amount of buildings that they're closing just to be able to kind of continue providing the really serious, necessary stuff. And the kind of, it must be exceptionally frustrating to see that stuff that's, does make a huge difference kind of wither on the vine.
Yeah. I mean, our museum has, with the cost of living crisis, we have a warm space, a food bank, a clothes swap shop. We're not just feeding cultural needs, but clothes on people's back and food. I mean, it's shocking.
And I suppose in some ways that's even worse, isn't it? That that these establishments that kind of shouldn't have to perform that task are having to perform that task. I suppose, like you say, it's great that that they can inhabit that space, especially because people can see it as a place to come for that. Not just the kind of the improvement of the mind, but in the improvement of everything else as well. But I suppose then, when hearing ministers kind of talk about how art isn't getting the priority, it's not just about art, is it? It's about all these basic human kind of connections that are trying to be fulfilled, that they would be lost as well.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
It's a strange feeling, isn't it, to feel so conflicted? Like, it's fantastic that people are in the museum. It's not fantastic that they're in there because their houses are too cold. It's that balance all the time, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Or because they're hungry. I mean, we obviously provide refreshments for the women, and and sometimes they need to take the packet of biscuits home. Or or sometimes they eat all of them whilst they're there, because
I think that's another thing, presumably, that staff maybe don't always factor in that they're going to be experiencing. So what's the future of these projects then? Because we've talked about how important they are. We've talked about the fact that the need is still there, and the funding is uncertain. So what will happen, do you think? How will these things go forward?
Well, I don't know really, but the work that I'm doing at the university, so the research project, is part of that is to advocate for for more of this sort of work, and for if we can sort of provide evidence for that shows that it really does improve well-being, that it has well-being benefits, then we're saving money elsewhere with less access to the NHS, and but I mean, it's as we get closer to the end, it's it starts to be a bit of a panic, and I've mentioned our cultural services manager. She spends a lot of time writing bids. And if you've had a project which showed clear benefit, and I can show that that there's more and more need out there, women who are referring other women, social prescribers referring people, the social prescribers providing a fantastic service, aren't they? Because they're providing non-medical interventions which can be really helpful. But is that anybody you speak to in museums, it talks about the sort of funding rounds and the bids, which are it's not a half an hour fill in a form. It's a massive piece of work, and the hoops that you need to jump through to demonstrate how the importance of your project is it's really considerable.
It puts a lot of pressure on the person who's trying to deliver an innovative project. That is, if you're co-producing, then it's in some ways it's led by the people experiencing the project as well. And then you've got things that you need to meet for funding bids. It gets very complicated about sometimes what you're trying to achieve and who you're trying to do this for.
Yes,
That's really,
I mean, I must say, I've in fact, one of the women that I spoke to today, she said, anything I can do to I was asking her about would she be prepared to do to take part in a semi-structured interview as part of my research, and she was like, Yes, absolutely. Anything that will advocate for this work and mean that more people could benefit from it, I'm up for doing. So they've been, the participants themselves have been incredibly supportive, and that's it's kind of nice to be working together on this advocacy, really.
Absolutely. I think we're sort of coming to the end a little bit now. I think we've sort of talked about this kind of the benefits and the experience for participants and for staff, and maybe some of the conflicts that are happening, because it is confusing, isn't it, in terms of like how do you make long-term plans for improvement when there's funding isn't there? On one hand, museums are there for kind of an artistic purpose, and now they're being sort of as well being accessed for kind of health issues as well, which is fantastic. And like social prescribers are sending people your way left, right and center, but at the same time people are choking your funding off. So it's like
yeah. And it's interesting, there's sort of ideas around care and collections in museums. The museums have always cared for objects. Have they always cared for people? In some ways yes, in some ways no, but the idea of collection, I feel we're kind of, we have this collection, but we're also almost sort of gathering or collecting people.
Absolutely.
In a sort of careful, nurturing space. I mean, if we can finish on a positive, we've a couple of weeks ago was the first Mansfield Carnival, which came out of a massive piece of work to produce an exhibition of the 75 years ago that Windrush arrived, and the Windrush generation, and Mansfield's never had a carnival before, and I wasn't sure that my women, as I refer to them, would like to be involved, but we had a workshop and we made feather headdresses, and we made an art power troupe, and they paraded through Mansfield with the other fantastic dance troupes and amazing costumes, and to see some women who came in 18 months ago like rabbits in the headlights, not sure what they were coming to or what they were doing, to have the confidence to strut round their town in a costume with others was just joyous.
I absolutely bet it was. I love the sound of that. That's a great place for us to be thinking about finishing on. So for anybody who's got any questions and watching, do be aware that we have been tweeting things out. Lots and lots of links are there. If you want to come back, I know we've been talking quite fast about quite a few complicated things, so if you do want to come back or look any of those things up, please do. It's all accessible via the hashtag MHTV, and I think it just remains me to say thank you so much to Tamsin. Thank you for your time and for your work in this way. It's really inspiring and exciting to see. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Nicky. It's been great to talk to you.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night.